Volume 7 C 107. Brain brought the sword down on the iron post. It split down the middle, and the two halves fell with heavy thuds into the sand. A round of cheers went up from spectators, and he said, "Bring me something harder." "I got something harder," someone shouted from within the crowd. Brain put his hand beside his mouth and called out, "You don't qualify. I also need something larger. And something that can last more than a minute before it goes down." Ooh! The crowd took in the verbal burn, and the applause redoubled. "You're not half bad," a dark-haired woman said as she approached out of the crowd. "You should make the finals with ease." "I plan to," Brain said and pointed toward Layali. "She expects nothing less than my best." Layali beamed from where she stood a few feet away, leaning against an unused post. "A half-elf daughter? No, you're human, right? So she's older than you even if she's still mentally. Mostly childlike, right? Adopted?" the dark-haired woman asked. Her white and red robes were of a curious and unfamiliar cut to Brain, and though she had a girlish voice and appearance, the fine hairs on his body stood on end as she came near. "Plucked her from the river. She's been with me ever since," Brain said, though he smiled broadly and went to pat her irresistibly adorable head. The young woman only barely moved out of his way in time to keep from him bumping into her. It wasn't lost on him that she swept her leg away to move, a combat gesture rather than a common avoidance. Layali's smile was enormous when the hard hand of the blue-haired human ran through her strands of golden hair. But he could feel the crackling of tension. "You're risking a great deal. There's no requirement to spare your opponents in this tournament. You could very well die." "Then what happens to her?" the young woman replied. "My lover, she'll look after her if I die. Besides, it's not like this is certain death," Brain said, but he felt the way Layali tensed. "Everything will be fine," Brain replied. The crowd, seeing that the replacement equipment was slow in coming, began to disperse, but the young dark-haired woman didn't leave with them. The little girl crouched down, picked up a bowl with a wet rag in it, and held it up. "Clean your face, Papa," she said with a child's insistence, and Brain obliged. Picking up the rag, he began to wipe the sand from his face. "So, who are you anyway, and why do you care?" Brain asked without looking behind him. "Oriel Omega, you could say I'm an interested party. I'm always curious about who deserves to live or die, and who actually does either one. I don't get out much. The truth is, this is the first time I've seen the outside of my home in ever. I've spent my whole life protecting something," she answered. Her radiant smile was almost cherry-like thanks to her red lipstick. Her small angled face with its high cheekbones was the picture of loveliness, a young girl on the precipice of the final step toward womanhood. "HMF, sounds like my companion, but you can't be from the slain theocracy. If you're as strong as you hint at, she'd know you," Brain half accused her. Oriel Omega noted the hardness with which he said the nation's name. "You don't care for the place, do you?" "They hurt my Layali, they hurt my lover. Of course I'm not fond of them," Brain retorted and looked over his shoulder. "So, you're strong?" Layali asked, picking up on Brain's deduction. "Strong enough to give strength or take it, and protect everything that is my lord's," Oriel Omega replied with a whimsical little smile. "You have a clever mind, Brain Unglaeus. I hope you can handle opponents tougher than iron posts, and ones who can hit back. I'd like to see you there at the end." "That's polite of you. Where did you say you were from?" Brain asked as he dropped the wet rag back into the bowl. "I didn't, but I'm from the kingdom of Nazarick," Oriel Omega remarked, and then after giving a polite little half-bow, she walked away. "Papa, could you, my master, cerebrate? Was he really strong?" Layali asked. Brain felt the impulse to lie, every fiber of his being said to do the same thing, but instead he crouched down and put his hands on Layali's shoulders. "Yes, he was. I beat him before, but he was strong. And yes, he may be stronger now than I was then. But I'm stronger too. I'll beat him again, and kill him in front of your eyes, and then he'll never hurt you again, I promise," Brain said, and with great gentleness he squeezed her muscles. Raymond's throat felt a lot harder than she remembered as she made her jump. "You bastard. You lied to me. You spent all our time together lying to me," she screamed her frustration without looking. The roar of the wind was as loud as any storm as her leap carried her far beyond the crowd, far above and beyond the buildings, and towards a garden she hadn't known was there. Even had she not been filled with wrath, the noise compelled yelling, and thus she raged at Raymond from the moment she grabbed his throat to the moment they landed on the soft green grass. She flung her arm down, and a heavy, agonized thud followed. Thus she looked down, ready to give him a good kick. Only to find, not Raymond. The slave? She exclaimed in her head and looked down at her own hand as if it had betrayed her. I was sure she looked down where the elf woman spasmed as she coughed. You can't kill him. The woman lying at her feet was still spasming and coughing, but she was rolling over onto her belly, the blades of grass bent beneath her, the dew of the morning gleamed like diamonds that she buried under her body as she tried to move herself so that she could rise. Are you insane? She snapped. What did you do? She shouted down at the elf. The only reason you're alive is because I wasn't trying to kill him. Kick the shit out of him. Sure. What were you thinking? She stomped the ground and the trees around them shook, casting leaves loose to drift down around them. Bodyguard. I'm his body. Bodyguard. Nua spat a glob of saliva down to water the grass as she tried to push herself up to all fours. I won't let you hurt him. She lifted her head and turned to look sideways up at the half-elf. She's eyes went very narrow. A slave trying to protect her master. Are you insane? No. He wants to help. Free us. Nua retched, and after one loud gulp noise, vomit shot past her lips and splashed over the grass. Lies. He was like a father to me, and he spent the last 20-some years lying to me about everything I thought I knew. She crouched down, ignoring the smell. She grabbed the short, blonde hair and yanked Nua's head up. Her heterochromatic eyes burned with wrath as she looked into the shimmering blue of her unintended victim. You're wrong. Nua's shout of defiance was followed by a shake of her head that tugged against her skull. It stung, but she ignored it. Look at my ears. They're whole. I lived in the theocracy most of my life. We're normally clipped quickly. But I'm whole. Would he leave me that way if he were lying? She paused, her eyes darted to the intact ears. That much was true. If he were dedicated to lying, yes. She answered almost immediately. He's a black scripture, anything goes. Then search me. If they didn't fall out, they're still inside my pouch. The elf shouted, and winced as she released the elf's hair and her hand darted for the pouch which was still secured to her belt. She felt the familiar texture of paper, her fingers clamped down like steel and yanked it out. What is this? She asked, shaking the papers she crinkled in her hands. L letters, Nua said and wiped her mouth. Letters of outrage from the cardinals themselves. She frowned and took a look. The hands of their authors were obvious enough. From Berenice's flowing script where she never broke her stream of thought, to the angry dots of Dominic's frequently broken quills whenever his temper got the better of him. It wasn't hard to accept them as genuine at least. What is the meaning of this? She snapped and clenched the letters in her fist. She shook them above the elf woman's face, her eyes full of disbelief at the words she'd read. A change, Raymond said from her back. Don't hurt her, she was just trying to protect me, he said, his arms open, his hands open, his palms empty. She whirled on the source of the voice. No sooner than she did so than she felt arms wrap around her legs. It didn't qualify as a tackle. But the elf hung on to her for dear life. I'm not letting go. The elf shouted as she looked from her to Raymond. She's lips pursed thin as he took slow, easy steps closer and the elf tightened her grip. Breaking it would have been easy, but it wasn't lost on the extra seat of the black scripture that doing so might well injure her. So she stood. You want answers. You deserve them, just please. Don't hurt Nua. She was trained as a bodyguard before that fell out of fashion. Raymond explained, and she's eyes narrowed. You expect me to believe that they used to train elves to fight? She demanded. No. To die. She was taught how to interfere, get in the way, to sacrifice herself for her master or the one her master set her to guard. She used her martial art before coming with me. That's how she was able to push me out of the way. She knew you were a threat before I did. Just promise you won't hurt her. Raymond pled as he came almost within arm's reach. A martial art. Bodyguards. So an elven meat shield. And these? She glared and shook the letters again, in front of Raymond this time. They flapped in the air, and to her surprise, he lowered his eyes away from here. The fruits of penance. I've been writing letters home, the things I've seen, the people I've met. Her story. He pointed down at Nua, who still clung tenaciously to Zeshi's legs, digging her fingers in and unwilling to let go. To every public venue, every temple I know, every school of law or theology I can name, and to all my comrades, including to the entirety of the Black Scripture. It did not go well. But it did go as I expected, Raymond said, and then he descended to his knees. Raymond Zeshi cut off her own words when he pressed his palms to the grass and slammed his forehead down to the ground. I'm sorry. I truly did think of you as a daughter. And I was trying, really, to protect you as much as the rest of humanity. I tried to balance it all, and left you ignorant, useless, an incompetent stupid fool who got her own brother killed, along with a bunch of others. And now you have the gall to say you're sorry? Zeshi raged at him. All you ever taught me was to fight. I nearly got my little girl killed because you all never taught me anything. She raged at the humbled human cardinal, and when she raised her leg to stomp her foot, the force sent the elf bouncing away. The crack of the bone barely reached Zeshi's notice in the midst of her fury. I trusted you. You more than anyone. Zeshi raged at him, her teeth bared like a wolf. You can't make this right. No matter what you do, the harm is done. She stalked over to him, her hand raised up. He didn't move. He only said, I know. Out of the corner of Zeshi's eye, she caught the motion, not directed at her. It would have been a near blur, but the half-elf could see it clear as the sky above or grass below, or the unmoving man who was prostrated at her feet between earth and sky. The elf was over top of him, her arms at his shoulders, the left forearm clearly broken, white bone piercing through her flesh and red blood staining the grass. You can't, Nua gasped, her teeth clenched against the pain. I don't know everything. He did tell me about you. A lot. Please, don't do this. You'll regret it. And we will regret it. Nua bobbed her ears up and down to make her point, and Zeshi recalled what Brain mentioned about the fate of servants whose master died by murder at the hands of an elf. She forced her temper down. Her jaw relaxed. The elf at her feet was breathing hard. Despite Zeshi's words, the one called Nua clearly did not believe her. Why are you even here? Why did you even come to see me? Zeshi demanded, and as she snapped out those words, it seemed to calm the elf, and her body visibly relaxed, as did that of Raymond. I didn't know it was you I was coming to see, Raymond said, I promise. I mean, I suspected when I heard the ridiculous name you chose for yourself, and the hair color. But the husband and daughter thing threw me off. The cardinal said as he rose slowly to his knees. I came to warn you that your father is here, Raymond said, and when he felt Nua's body wince, he glanced to see her broken arm. He immediately reached for his traveling pouch. Nua, your arm. He gave the order and, albeit reluctantly, she extended it and allowed him to push the bone down back into her flesh. We'll get a healing potion on the way back, but this will dull the pain, he said, and began wrapping a green, herb-streaked bandage around the injury. You shouldn't have done that for me, he muttered. She's not wrong. I don't care. Nua glared up at the half-elf. She'd have ruined everything for a moment of childish revenge. Don't you think before you act? Are you stupid? Nua berated the half-elf, who took a step back by sheer reflex under the first verbal assault on her person since the village, and one far more personal than that. He lied to me. He and his whole country. They used me, Zeshi shouted back, balling up her fists, but her rage devolved into confusion when the elf whose arm was being wrapped, burst out into bitter laughter. Oh, I know enough about you to know how you were used. I'd trade places with you in a heartbeat. Nua snapped the fingers of her other hand. Spoiled brat, you're the lucky one, and you should know that by now. And know enough to think before you act. Nua barked and then hissed as Raymond began to tighten the bandage. I'm sure you've got reason to be angry, but not to screw up everything for the rest of us. You kill him, who speaks to the cardinals. Who tries to reform that hellhole. Who tries to reform the faith of the Six. We'd be lucky if your petty tantrum didn't result in a mass purge of us in retaliation. Zeshi's mouth opened briefly to deny it, but then she thought of all she'd seen. What she knew. She could not. It's all too easy to see someone like Dominic trying to get someone even more radical put into place. Shit. She's right. The realization killed the rest of her will to anger. Then it hit her. Wait, my father is here? Zeshi's wrath returned with a whole new target. Yes, the winner among the women champions will enter the bracket after the first eliminations of the men. The Elf King will be their first opponent assuming nothing eliminates him. Raymond explained and slowly got to his feet, fending off Nua's attempts to help him rise by gently pushing her hands away. I see. Zeshi crossed her arms and faced the pair. I'll thank you for what you seem to be trying to do, Raymond. But I don't think I want to see you again. I can't really look at you. Maybe someday, but you had a hand in letting everything happen, and hiding it from me. I plan on winning the throne, and I will not be a friendly ally to your country the way your comrades hoped. I understand. Raymond lowered his eyes, but let me ask something of you, something not for my sake. You can ask. Zeshi answered, though her body notably tensed at the coming request, her feet shifting ever so slightly before she squared herself again in front of him. Take Nua, when you win. I admit I'm curious about this man and child you seem to have taken up with. But if they're more than just a cover for you, she can help. She's held every job you can imagine and has been a great help with me. If I take her back to the slain theocracy, I have a good idea what Dominic will do to her, and there's no way she'll be safe in my house even if I can keep her. I have my doubts that she'd even be safe for the rest of this trip. Please? He asked. Raymond, no, Nua snapped at him, her head yanking over to him, but he had eyes only for Zeshi. They're more than a cover. You probably guessed it was the swordsman we met. And you're right. The girl, someone he found, she's a half-elf like me but with a life closer to hers. Zeshi indicated Nua with a nod, and Raymond seemed to shrink at the implied horrors and the rebuke they carried. If she's not willing to stay with me, I don't think I can force her, and I'm nobody's mistress. Convince her and when I win, I'll take her on. A parting gift for the man I used to think of like a father. Now, get out of my sight. We're done, Zeshi said, then straightened, spun on her heel, and walked away from them both. Volume 7 C 108. There's a lot of them here, Evil Mountain, Tia whispered to Gagran. And no sign of evil guards, Tina added. They're not that stupid. Gagran replied, how many places have we hit? How many priests? How many monasteries? They can't guard everywhere, Evil Mountain. Tia answered, but Gagran shook her head. I don't like this. I don't like this at all. Ahead of them stood the long house which housed the acolytes and novices. On the grounds around it stood a great field of flowers, so many types that Gagran could not name even 1 in 10 of them. I doubt even Lakes would have recognized them all. Anguish ripped through her heart. Why hasn't she? Where is she? Gagran bemoaned. In spite of her anger, her face twisted and lip quivered, her body shivered as she tried to think, remember, and forget, all at the same moment. How could you? She asked for the 1000th time as she recalled the blood-red eyes of their shorty, still and tranquil in death. That such a cruel end could come to her little sister sparked the hatred for the faith that killed her, all over again. The vibrant field of flowers of every shade swayed back and forth in the steady billowing breeze, but the trees which surrounded it stood strong and steady, offering excellent concealment from any danger. But Gagran still didn't like it. Her twisted face became a tight-set jawline, and her large meaty hand clasped the branch of the tree behind which she hid. We wait, she said at last, we can beat any common guards coming our way, but after the swath we've cut, they'll be sending stronger ones. They may already have, and this is far, far too quiet. Will you just attack, already? I'm getting bored. A voice came out of the darkness. The fuck? Gagran jumped backward 20 yards. Trees shattered in her wake until she slid to a stop just before the crashing noise ended. Tia and Tina jumped into the shadows and vanished without touching so much as a green leaf. A long, low whistle which had an upward change to the pitch, replaced the crashing noise. HMPF, was that really necessary? The hidden speaker asked. I'll have you know I like trees, and I'm not at all fond of seeing them destroyed by big oafs. Come out here where I can see you, and call me an oaf. Gagran snapped and brought her hammer from her back to a guard position in both her hands. Fine. The voice said, and a spark caught an unlit torch, bringing it to life, and from out of seemingly nothing a young man with ink-dark hair appeared, his face wreathed in shadows and flames. He was a good-looking figure, younger than Gagran by a few years at a glance and clad in black and silver plate armor. Who are you? Gagran asked, her instincts screaming at her to get away. Nobody should be able to avoid Teotina's senses. Nobody. I'm the man whose vacation you have interrupted, the young man said as he approached with steady, fearless steps. A pair of kunai came out of the darkness. He batted them both away with one swipe of his spear. The metal objects pierced the ground to stand upright. Do you have any idea how hard it is for me to get time off? The sweet bark trees will be at their peak of perfection soon, and instead of being over in Albion, I have to come all the way out here and hunt you three down. That's a massive inconvenience and I am very cross with all of you. That's a long name, Gagran said, and repeated his entire statement to him. He stopped, cocked his head, and then broke into a boyish grin as he realized it was a joke. I've got to buy time, she said, and began uttering the various martial arts she knew by speaking with her jaw clamped shut. Very funny, almost funny enough, but not quite. No, not quite enough. I guess I should give you my name though. If I'm going to kill someone anyway, it costs me nothing to be polite. Or that's what Raymond has always said. He shrugged and leveled his spear. I am Senatakoni, captain of the Black Scripture, and the strongest of the Godkin. Well, except for one, and she might not count. It depends on how you think of it really. He paused and scratched his head. Do you think awakened children of the Elf King count? I'm sure I don't know. Gagran's heart pounded like a horse's hooves. She activated every martial art she knew, and when four kunai came out of the darkness and they too were batted away like buzzing mosquitoes, she could still feel sweat beginning to form on her skin beneath her armor. Oh. Well, it doesn't matter anyway. You've already delayed my vacation. All that really matters is that you haven't got a chance, so the question is, do you want to die quick and clean, or quick and dirty? Senna asked, and the weight of his strength crashed down on her, like eyes looming over her and promising death, like a baby bird caught in the eyes of a hungry serpent. For that instant, Gagran could not move. When it cut off, Gagran whispered, "Run. Evil Mountain." Tia and Tina spoke both at once. You heard me. Run. I'll hold him back for as long as I can, Gagran shouted. Nope, Senna said and put his spear on his shoulder. He tapped it there and shook his head. What do you mean, no bar? Senna? Gagran asked, eyes darting around in the dark for a solution. I mean I can't have that. I really can't. I don't really like the priests much, and I mean I really don't like them. But I'm afraid I can't have you killing them just willy-nilly. So you have to die here, he said, and when two dark bullets emerged out of the shadows, he simply ducked and avoided them both. What if? What if we ran in the direction you're going on your vacation? Gagran grasped at straws, but it seemed to strike a nerve. Go on, Senna said with a polite and deferential wave of his hand toward the mountain of the woman. We'll run in the direction you want to go on your vacation in. And you chase us that way. Then. You have good reason to just leave when you're finished. Gagran licked her lips. She could feel it, almost see it, the casual way that power seemed to crackle invisibly around the human in front of her. He rubbed his chin and gave it some thought. I suppose there's no downside to it. Plus I'll be far enough away that they won't want to wait for me to come back and explain it. Finally, Senna nodded and snapped his fingers. Deal. I'll even let you put up a good fight. Your friends can run west, toward Albion. If I feel them veering off to go elsewhere, I'll tell them to raise you from the dead just to punish you for their deception. His spear snapped down in front of himself into the ready position. You heard him. Go, Gagran shouted into the dark. Evil Mountain. The twins shouted. I said, go. We knew this was going to happen sooner or later. Just go. Let me deal with this one and I'll rejoin you when it's all over. Gagran slid one foot back into the battle position, ready to charge. A woman after my own heart. It's a shame. I might have liked you if things had gone differently. He shrugged, and felt the two in the shadows retreat. Gagran launched herself forward. She gave her hammer a swing downward, and the spear-bearer put himself beneath it, his black spear overhead. The ground shook beneath them both as she put all her weight down on him, her teeth clenched. I won't let you hurt them. Gagran gritted the words out. The torch the spear wielder once held still glowed from its place on the ground where it dropped. The fire began to spread out, catching on the grass and clawing its way toward the trees, climbing them like a winding snake before lighting them like giant torches being carried by the world itself. The flames became an inferno and the heat promised to punish their bodies if the pair lingered on. "I know," Senna said just loud enough for him to be heard over the ever-rising cacophony of the crackling, raging fires. He then dropped one hand away from his spear and it came out, striking Gagran in the guts and sending her flat on her back. The fire kissed the fragments of exposed flesh, but before she could scream, Senna grabbed her ankle, spun, and flung her away. She bounced end over end, arm over arm, scattering sparks out of the woods and into the field of bouncing flowers maintained so lovingly by acolytes over centuries. Senna charged after her, but slow, allowing her time to rise up. He noticed that her hammer remained locked in her hand, and a fragment of admiration for her warrior spirit. She spun on her heel and swung the hammer wide. He ducked and slid, grinding flowers into the ground beneath his knees while the sparks started fresh fires in a dozen places that spread out to join together in a conflagration. Smoke spired up into the dark sky and the orange glow lit up the area for miles around. He avoided her, ducking, weaving, flipping over her. Again and again, she failed to land a blow while he struck her body with quick, rapid strikes that pierced her armor as if it weren't even there. Blood replaced creamy flesh at her shoulders, thighs, calves, and finally her face. "I won't let you," she shouted at him again and redoubled her efforts. "Gah!" she bellowed and her hammer rose and fell, rose and fell, rose and fell again and again as she came at him from angle after angle, his spear blocking a blow only to have to block the opposite end a moment later. "I won't die so easily. You won't take my sisters. I won't let you. Not another one. Not another. Not another." She wept bitter tears and pounded away against her foe. "I know," he said, and when she slowed down only by the slightest hair, his spear thrust into her throat. The taste of blood shot up over her tongue and ran down past her lips. The blurring tears in her eyes ran down into the red, dripping and commingling on the ground. The conflagrations spread and reached them at last. Fire hissed on the ground when her bloody tears touched and extinguished the tiniest dot of burning flowers. Gagran's hammer slipped from her grasp and fell into the fires. The heat that began to hurt stopped hurting her body. "I feel so heavy," she thought. Her eyes looked down the length of the spear to the black-haired warrior's face. He had one foot back and one bent at the knee, his left arm back and his other still held fast, one-handed, and at the end of the spear, her body still held upright. "I never had a chance," Gagran acknowledged, "but I can buy them a few more seconds," she told herself, and rather than fall, her now free hands, with agonizing slowness, grabbed the spear, and she yanked herself forward. Senna's eyes widened with brief surprise. The lumbering mountain of a woman lunged along the length of his weapon, her neck passing through and through as her arms came out again to wrap around his body. "Not so easy." She gurgled her words out, spurting her blood all over the face and front of her killer as she used the last of her strength and began to squeeze. "Crush, crush," she tried to say, but it came out as only a gurgling moan. Senna released the spear and allowed her the final effort. He waited until the last strength fled her dying corpse, and then with great gentleness he put her down into the bed of burning flowers. "You were one hell of a fighter. If they'd sent less than me, you might have had a chance," he said, and drew out his spear from the hole it made in her throat. He swept it out in front of him, scattering her blood away to his into the fire that turned night into day. "I suppose I can go just a little bit slower. One more parting gift," he said as her hair caught and began to scorch her flesh. He then turned, hopped to the top of the building, and leapt well beyond the reach of flames to begin a light jog after the two remaining murderers. The body was charred black by the flames when a pair of Hanzos grabbed it and dragged it through the gate. They emerged in the lab of Demiurge, and when he pointed to a metal slab, the invisible Hanzo swung the body back and forth between them. "Heave! Ho!" they shouted, and the thunderous clang of heavy flesh and metal upon metal rang out through the room. "That's another one. And I'm making such marvelous progress with these," Demiurge said and pressed his glasses against his crystalline eyes. A tiny, cruel smile spread over his face. "Keep an eye on the others, let them wreak havoc for a little longer, even if it means you have to distract the hunter. The fewer priests the slain theocracy has, the easier the Allfather's plans can be brought to fruition." The Hanzos made a pointless show of bowing, and made their retreat back the way they'd come. "Now," Demiurge clapped his hands together and rubbed them with a dragon's greed while he approached the charred corpse. "Let's see what we can make out of you." Volume 7 C 109. "Do you want to attend the early fights, Ainz?" Kalka asked as she set their son down in his cradle. Not particularly, Ines remarked from where he sat beside Albedo. She held a fork up to his mouth with a small hunk of meat on the end, and one hand beneath to catch any juices that should drip off. He managed to keep from blushing at her smiling face, opened his mouth, and allowed her to feed the bite to him. "Oh, well, if you don't wish to," Kalka said, lightly touching the cheek of their now sleeping child. "Though if you like, we can have Cocytus tend to Aurelian and go. But the only one of the others intending to visit the first day is Queen Baraha." He chuckled. She tried to convince the Golden Queen to go, and Rena said it was too sweaty for her liking. Kalka had to titter a little, holding one hand up to her lips. "That does sound like her. But it's good that the two of them are getting along so well. Harmony among so many nations is so rare, we need space to breathe." "I couldn't agree more. Of course, once we've brought the Baharuth Empire into the fold, that will make things far easier. With those vast resources at our disposal, a truly massive empire from the borders of the City-State Alliance in the east, to Argland in the north, the Elf Kingdom in the south, and the Southern Holy Kingdom in the west, and of course, the Draconic Kingdom in the southeast, is feasible. We just have to deal with them," Albedo said, and sliced another piece of meat free of the hole, then stabbed it with a fork and offered it up to Ines. Kalka left her son and strode to where the pair sat, then reaching for a pitcher, she poured it into a silver chalice, then taking it up in both hands, she offered it out to Ines. He took it without hesitation. "Have the elves already given up?" "Almost without a fight," Albedo answered. Aura and Mare simply demonstrated that there was no hope of resisting, and now King Mare I is on the throne. Right about now, Aura should be on her way by dragon back to Kami Miyako, or... Albedo paused and touched the dimple of her cheek before looking away. "I didn't tell her to go right away. Knowing her, she's probably having the elves bring her examples of the local beasts for her to tame. But that will be fine. A few days, a week, when they visit Kami Miyako, there will be peace there as well." "What about the Elf King? Does he know his kingdom has been taken from him?" Kalka asked as Ines drained the chalice, and without thinking, the Holy Queen refilled it. "Not yet," Ines answered. A slightly vindictive smile forced Albedo to pause in her romance play plan number 7, Feed the Lover. "I'm allowing Queen Draudillan to inform him, from the dais where we will be standing, when he has taken his position in the arena. He will find out in front of everyone that he is the king of nothing. And if he tries to strike, I will finish him myself. If he doesn't, he'll die on the sands. He will not leave this city alive." Ines leaned slightly forward, took the meat from the fork, and then brought the wine to his lips. He chewed and swallowed before adding, "I will have a world where all my children can be happy, and what threatens that world must be removed. As the All-Father wills it." The mother and Mother Tubi said in unison, and, briefly caught off guard, they met one another's eyes where each saw themselves reflected in the other. Smiles small and thoughtful spread out, but neither said another word. Instead, Albedo cut another slice of meat, Kalka refilled the wine, and they ensured that the father of their children ate and drank his fill. It was easy. Layali slipped a little herb into the cups of both Brain and Zeshi that night, and waited for them to fall asleep. Neither were especially talkative. Not from the time they left the arena, nor all through the rest of the afternoon. She lay in bed on the other side of the room. The pair had fallen asleep beside each other, but neither had shown interest in more than that. Even without her interference, Layali could tell they were distracted by troubles of their own, troubles which made them exceptionally tired. When she was sure they slept, Layali curled up tighter one more time. Terror thrummed through her veins, her body felt taut as a freshly drawn bowstring. Her small fingers clenched into fists as she clutched the sheets. They were the softest things she'd ever touched. The blanket over her kept her so warm. She closed her eyes. "I can't lose them. I can't. I can't. I can't. I can't. Not again." Aureola Mega's warning lingered on in her mind, and though the night was dark and fear of being alone without the pair again haunted her greatly, she slowly slipped the thick crimson blanket off of her body and planted her feet firmly on the floor. She'd kept her clothes near at hand just for this purpose, and thanks to her mother's senses, the darkness was no real obstacle to getting dressed. Clad in her travel clothes, she slipped out the door and headed for the stairs, leaving her mama and papa behind her. But even though she could no longer hear their snoring, The stairs she'd descended were of golden wood and polished smooth with a vibrant red carpet running down the center and a high rail that Layali had to reach up to hold onto. She descended the steps as fast as her feet could carry her, every step causing her shadow to dance in the candles that flickered overhead. Her breath quickened as she made the double turn to reach the ground floor and rushed to the desk at the front. She reached up to the surface and tapped her hand on it. "Hello?" she asked, then stepped back so she could see over the top to where a young human woman of chestnut hair done in a ponytail behind her head, sat with a warm smile plastered on her face. "Yes, young lady?" she asked in a lilting, lute-like voice, leaning forward so as to not loom too large over the little Layali. "Ah, is there an Oreolomago at this place?" Layali asked. "It's important." The woman gave a gracious smile and said, "I can tell you she is here, but I can't give out her room number. But if you'd like to speak with her I can send someone to ask." "It's late though, are you sure she'd be willing?" "I think so." Tell her it's a matter of life and death, and who gets either." Layali replied and began to chew on her lip, her eyes darting around a little. The woman behind the golden-colored wooden counter furrowed her brow just a little and pulled a red silk rope which hung by her right hand. A moment later a young boy dressed in green from head to toe approached her. The woman scrawled a quick note, handed it to him, and he was gone. It was not a long wait. The boy returned, nodded, and the woman pointed toward the hall. "Room 41, she said, and with a tiny bob of her knees, Layali rushed for the room as fast as she could without actively sprinting. Despite not sprinting, Layali was breathing hard and felt herself to be on pins and needles when she reached her slender arm up to knock on the door. Her knuckles rapped against it, and she heard the click of the handle turning to allow her within. The black-haired woman was there just as Layali recalled her to be, prim in dress, straight in posture, but with a delicate and almost playful smile on her ruby lips. "What is it you wanted to see me about?" Oreolomaga asked, then gestured to a chair not far from where she stood. "You said you can give power. But was that like training or something or more?" Layali asked. Oreolomaga let out a girlish little giggle and bent forward with hands on her knees so that she was close to Layali's face. "Why, do you want power, little one?" "No. I don't want Mama or Papa to die. And there's some bad and powerful ones here. And, if you can keep them alive, I want you to. You said you came from the kingdom of Nazarick, so that mean you represent them or you just from there?" Layali pressed and kept her eyes up on the pretty, pale face. "I speak for the Allfather in all my actions," Oreolomaga replied. "So, if he got something really important, really good, would he protect my mama and papa?" Layali inquired. "I suppose," Oreolomaga said, then straightened up. "That's not really why I'm here, but then again, he might qualify." What if someone has the power to not die?" Layali asked. Her heart threatened to leap through her throat, but she kept her voice as steady as she could. "That would be something the three geniuses would very much like to see. Such a person could ask almost anything for a chance to study them." "Do you know such a person, little girl?" Oreolomaga asked. "Bring me a knife, and I'll prove I do," Layali replied, closing her eyes, and bracing herself to prove what she knew. "This is for Mama and Papa. Be brave, it's easier than what Cerebrate did," she told herself, and when the blade was in her hand, she got to work. 3 hours later, Oreolomaga was more than convinced. Volume 7 C 110. Layali shivered in place and watched the dog-faced woman work. "Just relax, woof. This is only the smallest sting. Our master always keeps his word, woof woof." The curious woman was dressed in a maid outfit befitting her race, and other than her frequent little woof noises, she seemed every inch an ordinary woman. "I know you said, but it's still scary seeing my blood come out," Layali said as she watched another jar fill. There were multiple samples of skin, hair, and blood taken from her for the crystalline-eyed man's use, though what he planned on doing with it, Layali had no idea. All he'd said was study. And all he asked was, "Will I have regular access to the subject?" And that was that. The chair on which she now sat was at least very comfortable, and other than the brief sting of the leech, and eerie sight of it being drained into a container before being reapplied, she felt no pain at all. And the snacks. She reached for the little round object the other maid referred to as a sugar cookie and shoved it into her mouth, where the flavor exploded. Layali's cheeks puffed, and the taste made her want to weep for joy as her heart danced in her chest. "Cute," the maid holding the snack tray said, and applied a sticker with a number on it, directly to Layali's cheek. It seemed almost like a compulsion, but the straight-faced maid with the silver tray seemed to be showing some kind of affection. For hours, other than the frequent use of leeches and the frequent taking of samples from her, to include an application of crystals and various harmless spells that had a wide array of effects, including making her grow cat ears at one point, she was treated like she imagined royalty must be. She chewed her cookies and kicked her feet back and forth, then reached for the tray held by the one called CZ and took a cup of rich-looking red liquid. She looked down at it. "This isn't blood, right, Miss CZ?" "No. It is called fruit punch. The supreme beings say it is a popular drink with children," CZ answered, and Layali brought the silver cup to her lips and tilted it up. The flavor assaulted her senses and she began to gulp deep, audibly, and drained it to the last drop, save for the red ring of it that formed around her lips. "It's so good," she squealed with excitement before another child entered the large, cozy bedroom in which her contributions took place. This one dressed in red and black, she carried a parasol over her shoulder and moved with the dainty grace of a royal lady. "How is it coming?" the pale, perfect child asked of the others. "Well, she is comfortable and happy, and we have nearly all the samples we will need before returning her." "Woof," Pestonio answered and gently pried another leech free. "So pretty," Layali whispered at the doll-like existence that was Shaltir Bloodfallen. Shaltir gave a dainty blush and said, "So observant." Then added, "Demiurge asked me to take a small sample through my own skills. Then after we're done, we'll then seal away any unpleasant memories again, and take her back to our winter." "You sealed my memory? Wait, is that why I can't remember coming here, just talking with Miss Omega and then being here?" Layali asked and furrowed her brow. "I don't know if I like that. We've been ordered to treat you with the utmost care and gentleness as a contributor to the future of the Allfather's realm. So, we're sealing any memory of the last few hours that is unpleasant. You will remember the snacks, the treats, the cozy chair, the warm room and dessert. Then you will be back with the ones you call Mama and Papa and know that you kept them safe. Doesn't that sound nice? It's only a few minutes, and you forget things all the time anyway. This is no different," Shaltir said as she approached and handed her parasol to Pestonia. "I still don't know." Layali's lips scrunched left and right as she thought that over. "Trade for more ice cream?" CZ asked, and Layali began to bob her head up and down like mad. "Yes, please," she squealed. Minutes later, she had what she wanted, a heaping cream-colored bowl filled with multiple scoops. She shoved the spoon in over and over again, licked up every bit of the chocolate syrup, and sucked on the cherries until she squished them with her tongue. "Okay. A deal's a deal. Do it. If it keeps Mama and Papa alive and together, I'll do anything," Layali said, then her eyes went wide as the pain hit. The porcelain doll was on her, the feel of teeth clamping down tore through her body, and her eyes began to close. Then Layali's eyes flew open and she shot up in bed. Her head all but spun around as she tried to recall where she was. A dream, all a dream? What? No. She reached down to touch her arm, and the flavor was still on her tongue. It was real, but then, "I think I'm forgetting something. What was it? What was it?" She put her hand to her forehead and looked down the length of the warm blanket that rested at her waist. "No. It doesn't matter. I got what I wanted, that's all I care about now," she mumbled and got up out of bed to stretch. On the bed, Zeshi and Brain were still asleep, so she went to where they lay, climbed in, and curled up between them both. Just a few more minutes, she thought, and closed her eyes one more time before they all had to be up. "Come at me," Cerebrate snapped at the trembling youth in front of him. The sands of the arena were warm, but while they were dry around Cerebrate, the young man was rapidly drenching the sands in sweat. "Come on. Do you think I have all day, you coward?" The adamantite adventurer scowled, another pathetic boy who was the best in his village borrowing his father's old army sword and coming after the throne. He's the fourth one this morning. None of the first four had adequate armor, but even if they had, they lacked adequate training. "Fine," Cerebrate shouted and strode forward against the young village boy with his sword clenched tense in nervous fingers. The sure-handed Cerebrate slashed only once. When he came within reach, the jugular was severed, and the young boy died to the sound of boos from the crowd. What I wouldn't give to have met that one when he was about 9 years younger. Cerebrate mourned as he swept his sword out to scatter the blood and turn the brown sands a rusty red. Village trash should not be here. Cerebrate's booming voice went out to the crowd, but more importantly, to his opponents waiting in the wings. Do I have to wipe out a village worth of village idiots before I get somebody that lasts more than one damn swing of my sword? Cerebrate thrust his sword into the sands with the tip down and crossed his arms in defiance. Pathetic. Just pathetic, he snapped as the young boys who worked in the arena ran across the sands, grabbed the young man's corpse by the ankles, and dragged the limp body away. Bring me something worth fighting, and you will be entertained, Cerebrate shouted at the booing spectators of many nations, then snatched his sword up by the grip, sheathed it, and left his position to wait for his turn to come again.